Oh, I see it.
You do? What do you see?
I see a thing that says webinar is now streaming live on YouTube at the top of my Zoom screen.
Excellent. Oh, yes. It's buffering on my side. Oops. And then I have to close it because I'm getting an echo.
Oh. I didn't hear an echo on this side, for what it's worth. See it. Okay, I'll tweet it now.
Okay, and I think I just close it so I don't keep hearing the echo. Oh, okay. Okay, I think I have to start the webinar, so I'm going to do that now. And here come our guests. Are you seeing a poll as people come in?
I do.
I'm seeing a poll.
Welcome to our panel, everyone. We're allowing some time to allow people to enter. And I see Dr. Kemabonta.
Awesome.
Dr. Kemabonta, you can activate your camera now, if you'd like. Thank you for filling out our poll. We're just curious to know who we're sharing the room with. We will start shortly. People are still entering the room. Hello, Dr. Kemabonta. I'm glad you could make it in.
Yeah, good afternoon or
Hello.
good evening. Hello,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
We can hear you. If you could activate your camera, that would be wonderful. People are just starting to enter the room. We're up to 60 attendees and we're expecting probably a lot more. So wonderful, we can see you now.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. We're just giving some more time for everyone to enter the room. If you want to fill out our poll, we'd love to know a little bit about you, even though we're in this webinar format. This gives us a chance to do that. Oh, I'm so sorry, Stephen. I should have put the Caribbean. You know what? I made this morning. I'm actually from Jamaica, so it's ironic. I think probably then the Caribbean ends up in the North American column, doesn't it? Is that correct? That doesn't seem right, though.
It does. Under most circumstances, it does go in the North American category.
It does, but it would have been nice to have that broken out. So apologies, but yes, please do indicate North America.
Antarctica.
Oh, Antarctica, you never know. Someone could be at a research station.
It's all possible. Where are the
Uh-oh.
arachnologists? Not too many arachnologists.
Not too many yet. We seem to have lost Dr. Kemabonta.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, you're still here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the numbers are stabilizing. So I think maybe we will end the polling now. And you can see the distribution here. So we have a lot of folks who are here who are entomologists or arachnologists, but not Black, and also want to learn about colonialism in science. There's also people who are representing different groups, including just I love bugs, which is great. So welcome to everybody. I will share those results so you can take a quick look. So we are live streaming on YouTube, and I will close the share. Sorry, I have a lot of windows open. Great. So welcome everybody to the panel on colonialism in entomology. We're very pleased to welcome you here today for what I think will be a really interesting conversation. My name is Maydianne Andrade. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and I'm pleased to be hosting today's panel. I wish to start by acknowledging the land from which I'm speaking today in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional home of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I also wish to acknowledge the lands from around the globe from which you're joining us today. As entomologists and arachnologists, we take seriously the responsibility to be respectful stewards of that land. Now for some housekeeping, this session is a webinar, which means you can't activate your cameras, but you can submit questions using the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote the questions of others to move them up on the priority list, because we will be considering questions towards the end of the session. In the first hour of this session, I will ask the panelists a series of questions, after which the respondent will offer thoughts, and we'll then move to the question and answer period. Now, before we start, I want to offer some framing for this discussion. Today, we will hear from our colleagues who are entomologists in the Global South. We've invited them here to help us initiate conversations about the ways in which colonial attitudes and norms are built into scientific systems, as well about the behavior of individuals that may reflect those norms. We need to think about how these can have considerable negative impacts on entire ecosystems of science across different countries and continents. And that's why we're here today, to try to change that. Now, we often talk about the work that's required to ensure that bias, racism, and colonialism do not shape science. I assume that you're here today to do that work, and the poll suggests that. But let's think about what we actually mean by that. Some of the hard truths you're going to hear today arise from the reality that nations with significant research budgets, which control much of the global access to the pursuit of and dissemination of science, are also shaped by colonial practices that exploited and enslaved peoples in the Global South, many from countries with Black or racialized majority populations. The legacy of those systems of colonialism continues. And in these structures, the power resides largely in white majority countries and among white scientists. This is not an easy thing to hear. I understand that, but I'm asking you to work today to avoid defensive reactions and to really take this opportunity to hear from our colleagues who've been so generous with their time to come here and speak to us. Carefully consider their perspectives and what it means for your own work and for our systems in science. Now, I am not white, but as a scientist in Canada, I'm a beneficiary of a colonial system. So the work is also mine to understand our impact and to understand what change is necessary. This work rests on all of us and should not rest on the panelists to circumscribe what they say to make it easier for us to hear it. Now with that, I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists today. First, Dr. Kehinde Kemabonta. She's an associate professor of entomology at the Department of Zoology, Faculty of Science in the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Our second panelist, ironically, it may be unable to join us because of difficulties with connections from the location where he is. We do hope he'll arrive at some point, and if he does, he will speak. And it was to be Dr. Sylvester Ogbuagu. He's a professor in the Department of Zoology at Obafemi Awolu University in Nigeria. He's also the president of the Entomological Society of Nigeria. We also have Gavin Campbell, who is a PhD candidate in environmental biology at the University of West Indies in Mona, Jamaica. And then Rhema Uche-Dike, who is a research assistant in the Department of Zoology, University of Lagos, Nigeria. And I also welcome our respondent, who may step in to answer some questions as well in Dr. Obwagu's absence. And that is Dr. Jessica Ware, who's the Associate Curator at the American Museum of Natural History. So I want to start first by asking each of the panelists to please tell us about their work and about the main focus of their research. And we'll start with Dr. Kemabonta, and I'll ask the other panelists to please mute themselves.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Kehinde Kemabonta. I'm a twin, and that's why I'm called Kehinde. My mother happens to have 3 sets of twins. I'm an associate professor of entomology at the Department of Zoology, Faculty of Science, University of Lagos. I've worked on pest management, insect pest management for over 29 years. That was when I was in a stored product research institute. But moving to the university about 10 years ago, I decided to diversify. And my reason was because we didn't have taxonomies. I was doing some work on termites. I couldn't identify them. And the person who could identify the termites had retired. So I now decided to groom students, to mentor PhD students to become taxonomists. So right now, I'm seriously into taxonomy, ecology, and biodiversity of insects, though my first love, pest management, is still part of me. And I have 4 PhD students working on taxonomy of insects, butterfly, ants, sources, and dragonflies. And we've really gone far. I have over 15 collaborators, both within and outside the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And if we could hear next from Gavin Campbell, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Gavin Campbell. I am a PhD candidate, as you heard before, and I work primarily with aquatic ecosystems of temporary water bodies, which dry at some point of the year, but then have water at another point. And I'm studying specifically the intricacies of that aquatic environment and the terrestrial environment to see how they interact. I'm also studying the evaluation of ecosystem services of some of those temporary water bodies, and the service that I have chosen has been pest control or mosquito pest control using aquatic insects. So that is my main focus. I also help out other graduate students at my university with their research on different things from saltwater ecosystems to corals. So I have a little bit of experience with those as well too. And I enjoy working with students and helping them realize how awesome entomology and science as a whole is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we'll ask Rhema Uche-Dike.
Hi, everyone. I am Rhema Uche-Dike. I am a research assistant at the University of Lagos in the Faculty of Science. I work in the lab of Dr. Kenny here. Here we work on dragonflies and damselflies, beautiful order Odonata. We work on the diversity, the abundance, the distribution, and the taxonomy here in southwestern Nigeria, and also extending to Nigeria at large. I also study the relationship between the diversity and the abundance of this beautiful order and water quality. For my undergrad thesis, that's exactly what I worked on, the relationship between the abundance, the diversity, and the relationship with water quality. I studied 3 lakes for a period of 6 months. Here we also work on ants, termites, and some other insect pests of food crops. From these studies here, I've been able to, work with her personally on 2 international grants, been able to publish some papers in peer-reviewed journals, some of which I've been able to present in some international conferences. And I've been so lucky, to be on this great journey with her, and I'm looking, further to take further my research to PhD level. And I'm looking to delve into the exciting world of genomics and phylogenetics, So it's been a great ride, meeting, great people and being a part of promising projects along the way. So yeah, it's been a great ride. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Jessica Ware, if you could just frame for us your interests and also your interaction with colleagues in the Global South a bit.
Thanks so much, Maydianne. So I'm a systematist and a taxonomist, and much of the work that we do is to travel the world to collect the specimens that we need for our phylogenies. And whenever we go to different countries, we interact and work with our colleagues in those locations. And I can't think of a country that I've been to where my colleagues didn't tell me, other people come here, they use our resources and take our expertise, and we don't even get to be in the acknowledgements of their papers. And that really kind of has sparked a lot of discussion in my lab, especially with some of my graduate students feel very passionate about this, like Salkatua, who I think is listening. And so we've really tried to work to develop the best practices, I suppose, for those of us who are doing systematics work, when we're working with our collaborators to make sure that all the resources can be shared. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll move to our first question then, and that is, can you please describe how colonial attitudes or approaches have negatively affected research in entomology in your context? And we'll start here with Rhema Uche-Dike.
Okay, yeah.
You just went mute, Rhema.
Sorry, okay, yeah. So I was reading an article some time ago, and I came across an article about a brief history on, there was this, enslaved laborer in the early 18th century in Jamaica. And, while they were in the field, he discovered a poisonous plant. And the colonial masters then, killed him because apparently he was attempting to cause havoc and was attempting to cause, disorder on the field. The interesting thing here is the historical records just labeled it an accidental finding. Historical records don't say anything about his name. They don't give him props for anything. They don't give him credits for anything. They just labeled it an accidental finding, and they don't mention his name. And eventually it was found out that this plant was not poisonous, and quite ironically, it was a cure for swellings, it was a cure for worms, it was a cure for a lot of other diseases. And these colonial masters just took all the credits for discovering this plant, and the man was never acknowledged or referenced anyway. So it just goes on to show how there is no recognition for the average Black scientist, there's no recognition for the average Black entomologist, so we need to be recognized, we need to be seen, we need to be heard, we need to be acknowledged. It still goes on, it still happens today in collaborations, in innovations. The Black man is not acknowledged, he's not recognized, there's no recognition for him. Speaking of acknowledgement, since science is all about solving problems, since science is all about solving problems, and one of the fundamental and most effective ways to solve a problem is understanding the problem. So how can you understand the problem if you do away with, if you discard the cultures of these people, if you discard their values, if you discard their traditions, their beliefs? So it has to be inculcated in practices today, in education today. People need to understand our perspectives. People need to understand where we are coming from to be able to solve the problems in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhema. Gavin, if you could offer your thoughts.
So coming from a colonial environment in Jamaica, we grew up seeing different people from different people at the heads of our institutions, from the people that are the majority of Jamaicans. So kids growing up, they don't see themselves as becoming scientists because they don't see Black scientists, they see white scientists. So whenever they think of science, they think, white, that's not me, I cannot go into science. And when it comes to the heads of certain organizations, the majority, like for the actual population of Jamaica, even though we do have white Jamaicans as well too, there's a higher proportion of white Jamaicans and white people in general at the heads of organizations when it comes to influence. So whenever individuals see that at the heads, they're still not a representative of themselves, someone that's supposed to be a part of the Jamaican culture and someone that's running the country or running a particular company, it really discourages them as thinking that they can be a part of that. They can be someone that is a leader, even if they have great ideas. There are certain systems in place that would prevent them from actually getting to those points. And one of those is that when it comes to, in Jamaica, when it comes to actually solving some problems, it's kind of odd that particular organizations and even the government actually prefer and go select local foreign researchers or white researchers rather than the local people who are actually trained and have the experience. So that again just instills the lack of faith that they have in Jamaican culture, even though that intimate part of that person would be able to help and connects more with the problem and be able to have more of the solution. And that also kind of does add to the point of pandering to rich countries where, because they have so much funding that they offer to us, there are certain things that we have to do, certain things that we can't say, certain things that we can't actually allow, because if we do that, then we do not have the access to the funding that they're graciously giving us. One of the things that I had read earlier this week in relation to Rhema's story earlier was there was this, the slave trade in general helped to enhance the collection of new specimens across the world, from the Caribbean to the Central America, Africa as well. And in that system, there was a system set up in order to transfer different organisms, ranging from insects to plants and animals as well too, from the Caribbean and Africa to the European nations. And those would be then studied to further enhance science. And whatever products from those that are instilled, whatever knowledge is gained, would then go back into making more funds, which would then further encourage the slave trade. So it was really a positive feedback loop. And it had so many different impacts, because there would be situations where the actual slaves were used in collecting specimens, but they were not acknowledged. And a lot of the times when those specimens are taken from their countries, they are not given their appropriate locations, appropriate titles, appropriate collector information. So all of that, when it comes to even doing research further, you don't have that connection. You have this specimen that's been here for 300 years, but you don't know that it was originally from Africa or from the Caribbean. So it's really hampering when it comes to additional research in the future and making sure that the different countries are respected in their own rights. Additionally, science has been, when it comes to science in the Caribbean, we have lack of resources. There are so many more higher income countries that have access to genetic work and molecular work, and we don't have that much available at the ready. Even when it comes to doing research here at the university, if we're going to do any genetic work, we have to be prepared to wait several months just to be able to get some equipment. So when it comes to primers, I know students who have waited 9 months just to get the primers, and those primers don't necessarily work at the first instance. So if there's a problem with those primers, you have to apply for another grant or wait another few months to be able to get access to that. So seeing that there's so many restrictions that can end up extending the time that people stay here for their degrees, and it can really push back the work that we have and we want to do, because there's so many incredibly cool ideas that we want to be able to put into effect. But with those resources, we don't have that ability to do so. And because of that, we've had to focus more on field work. But in the scientific community, field work isn't as glamorous when it comes to research as molecular work and genetic work. So we already feel behind in not having the resources. We additionally feel behind in not being able to use what resources we have to make research better for the long run. And it really is disheartening, really is disheartening. And another aspect I'd like to touch on, I hope this is not over time, is parachute science, like you had mentioned before, where people just come in, take what they need, do not include the local people, do not acknowledge them, do not share the resources that they garnered, and then go. And one instance that I found in my own research was some work on plants and animals in the Dutch Caribbean. There were so many papers there, and I can see so many references, but when it comes to actually accessing those papers to read them, they're in journals that are not currently available here in Jamaica. So it's really hard to get to them, and I have to just work with what other people have mentioned in their own papers referencing those. So hopefully in the future, we can work towards integrating more local people, indigenous people in research and not excluding them, because we're all in this together and we're all supposed to be helping each other for humanity overall and life on Earth in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Gavin. Dr. Kemabonta, could you offer your thoughts on this, how attitudes and approaches have negatively affected work?
Thank you so much. Decolonization, as we all know, is a movement to eliminate or at least mitigate the disproportionate legacy of white European thought and culture in education. Now, according to some advocates, this is not just about increasing the number of Black scientists. It also means dismantling the hegemony of European values and making way for the local philosophy and traditions that colonies had cast aside. Now, in 2009, 80% of Central Africa's research papers were produced with collaborators based outside of the region. About 60 to 70% of the scientists based in developed countries did not acknowledge their collaborators, who just says more on what Gavin said. And you know, this is still happening to date. And even those of us that are in the developing countries, when we do the work, if it's a research you carried out without the people from the Western side, you know, acknowledging or being part of it, the work will not be accepted, especially when it is away from the norm. If it's same with the norm, it's accepted. But if you have something else, no, it's not accepted. I remember the work on Odonata. We got some grants from GBIF, and we did a lot of work. We went around all the museums, you know, to digitize the dragonflies, even personal collections. Now we brought out this, the species diversity that we have. There were a lot of question marks on them. And why? Because they felt those ones were not supposed to be in Nigeria. But we now found that when I have a PhD student doing some work and he's really going to the interior part of the country, of the forest, and he's now able to discover some of these so-called species that were said were not in existence in the country. Now, another issue we have is that it's a Herculean task to publish in reputable journals. Once it is only you or others within your country, they just feel they are fake results. And most times they are not fake results. You don't have, recently I traveled to somewhere and we were to learn on molecular genetics. I mean, we did some work on the Socooptera. And within 3 weeks, we were able to do a lot of things. Now the people stopped teaching us because they thought we were learning too fast. Now we even learned and we were really excited. We came back to Nigeria, no equipment, nothing to use. Of course, with time, you forget what you learned. So we have a lot of issues on fundings. We have a lot of issues on equipment. You go there, learn it, or they come here to teach us, we appreciate it, but you don't just have anything to use. So what do we do? So these are all the issues we have, and I'm really hoping that with time, these things will get ironed out, and then we'll be able to fly along with our colleagues in the Western world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kemabonta. Dr. Bwagu was not able to join us today, but I do want to just mention one thing that he mentioned during our practice session, which is attending conferences in North America, which he's always pleased to do, and to meet his international colleagues, who he says are very welcoming and interested in seeing him there. But he did mention that when he gives talks, it's radio silence when he's finished. He doesn't get questions. He doesn't necessarily get that feeling of engagement that he would expect from colleagues who are happy to see him there. So I just want to mention that one point, not to appropriate his voice, but he did talk about that in our practice session. So let's move on to the next question, which is, how are the aspirations, goals, or progress of new people entering the field of entomology affected by colonial attitudes? And for this, I'm going to focus on the two people who are training session role at this point, which is Gavin Campbell and then Rhema Uche-Dike.
I'll go first. So when it comes to research in entomology, That's always one of the favorite courses of the undergraduate students. There's so even me in my undergraduate years, it was so exciting to be out in the field and just collecting insects. You get to see the incredibly great diversity there is, even just in a piece of place that you would just consider bush. Like there's so many interesting things there, and how they interact is so incredibly fascinating. But one of the main issues when it comes to actually getting into that field as an established entomologist is a lack of funding. So there is so much that is lacking. Like we have nets that we have for entomology courses, but over the years they break and they wear out. But there's not the same kind of re-establishing them. There's no bringing them back. You have to make sure that what you do have, you can't just get a new one. You have to make sure you work with that one you have. If the stick is broken, tie the stick back up. If there is a bunch of tears in the net, sew the net back up. There is not another one coming. You have to be able to work with what you do have, and then that also does limit it, because if you're working with an insect net, you definitely can't use that net in any thick brush. So that thick brush is not getting sampled. So we don't get to find out exactly what's going on in those environments. And in addition to a lack of funding for anything from equipment to research, there are also a lack of resources, like I had mentioned before, when it comes to doing genetic work as well. And the next point is development. There are not many updated updated list of species, and updated research for the current Jamaican environment. And when it comes to even environmental assessments, there aren't the resources to be able to do extensive research on finding out what species there are, because there are so many thousands of insects that haven't been studied, and likely many that haven't been described or even identified or found yet. So it's really limiting when it comes to actually being able to explore all of that. In Jamaica as well too, there is a fear of tiny things. So insects in general, people do not like them as much as the bigger, more flashy animals like the mammals and some of the birds. So when it comes to doing work on them, there's not much investment, because not many people for the general public are interested. So there's not that, oh, I want to go into science and then or I want to go into entomology and that's like a fun thing. It's kind of a weird thing when it comes to wanting to go into science or wanting to play with bugs for the rest of your career. So that I find is one of the other things that kind of limits people as well too. Another main point is a lack of opportunities. I do not recall seeing many entomology jobs when I am finished, when I'm looking for jobs, and even several years of different colleagues going in and looking for jobs. There aren't entomology jobs. There aren't even jobs in science on a whole are very limited and restricted. So many people either end up going into a field that is not a scientific field, or leaving the country to be able to pursue their passions. And it really is so heartbreaking to see so many of students pass through the years and take years just trying to find a job in science and then get disheartened and end up doing something that is not their passion, because bills need to be paid. So it'd be awesome to see the government and Jamaica as a whole embrace science, because there is so much that can be done when it comes to fixing problems. It's not that there are no problems, just that there's no attention to the sources and the solutions of those problems to actually get them done with. And another thing when it comes to colonial attitudes specifically is not trying to adapt other countries' behaviors or other regions' behaviors. One of the things that happens quite readily in Jamaica that I do not like is formal attire. I dislike formal attire in general. And in a tropical country where it is hot and humid for most of the year round, formal attire is not comfortable at all. But there are still so many jobs, even scientific jobs, that have a requirement for formal attire. I am very glad that at the university, my professors are people that are more lax. Some, like, they do not wear shoes, they're not wearing like suit and tie. They will literally wear their slippers and jeans to come to lab. And that makes me feel comfortable, because I don't have to suit up to be considered an entomologist. I can go comfortably in the field, do whatever I want, as long as I'm protected. And it's okay. It makes me feel so comfortable, even though it's not how it would be done in the white countries. It is something that is applicable to here, and each region needs to have their own kind of adaptations to their own climate. So that's one thing that I'd like to add, and yay.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Next, we'll ask to hear from Rhema.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, drive people to continue in the field of entomology, so, graduate level is some of their experiences in undergraduate level. You know, for their thesis and for their projects, you know, I think one of the fundamental limitations is, okay, practically speaking, just paint this picture in your mind of there's a black man and there's a white man. There's a white man going into the field because, you know, the field of entomology is a field, so to speak. So you really have to collect insects, even though not everybody does that, but insects have to be collected to be worked on. So, you know, a white man is going into the field. You know, when an average person sees a white man in the field, they just feel, okay, he's on the verge of something great. He's on the cusp of, you know, discovering something groundbreaking, you know. But when they see a black man in the field, that's not the same thing that comes to mind, you know. There's a different thing that comes to mind. It's either it's fetish, what's he doing there? Is he okay? Is he mentally okay? What's he looking for in the bush? You know, just all the negative things that come to mind, as opposed to the positive things that would come to mind if you were a white man that was seen in the field or in the bush, you know, trying to get insects. You know, when they see a black man with a sweep net in the bush, it's just all the negative things that come to mind. And you know, this is quite personal for me because, you know, when I was, you know, for my undergrad, I worked on dragonflies, and you know, I had to go into the field to collect some of them. So we worked in some recreational areas where there's people doing all the fun things, there's people doing all the amazing things, you know, riding on roller skates and everything, and you're just there looking at them having fun, and then all you're with is your sweep net trying to. So I think first of all, it has to do with, you know, decolonization of the mind. First of all, I had to personally move past that and see that, okay, what I'm doing is, you know, it is for a greater purpose. You know, I'm doing something, I'm making a difference. So I had to see past the shaming effect. I call it the shaming effect. I had to see past the shaming effect of people looking at me and saying, people having fun, everybody there with their nice clothes and everything, and looking at me just in the bush, you know, trying to get an insect that is running away, and because dragonflies are really fast. So running away, and you know, you're chasing after them. And so yeah, it wasn't a pretty sight. But you know, eventually I had to internalize, and I had to find a way to, you know, move past that thought, move past that, you know, the notion I had, because it was flawed. So that extends to general public. It's the way we see things. It's the way we glorify a white man going into the bush, and then we don't for a black man going into the bush. You know, it's just, there's a disparity which has to be worked on, which has to be closed. So yeah, there's that. And you know, from the undergrad level, students are just generally uninterested. We're just generally uninterested in, because as Gavin said much earlier, when we see, people generally just assume white is synonymous to scientists. So they just assume or believe they don't have a place in the science, you know, space. They don't have a place in the science space. So they're just generally uninterested. They just want to finish this degree. I don't know how it is in the Western world, but back here, students just want to finish and just go out to something else and just do something else, be involved in something else. There's no real, so there has to be, first of all, it has to be a correction in the mind. People have to see things differently. People have to be reoriented and see that science and black are also synonymous, just the same way science and white is synonymous. So we have to, you know, first of all, there has to be a decolonization of the mind. We have to see things differently. We have to correct a lot of ways we think. And I think that is one of the fundamental ways this can be corrected.
Thank you very much, Rhema. And of course, it's hard to decolonize the mind when all the exemplars you have don't look like you. So I really appreciate that. I think next we'll move on to this question that I think many of us also want to hear, given these reflections. What are the best practices for engaging in mutually beneficial collaborations with entomologists from the Global South? And I'll ask Dr. Kemabonta if she could offer her thoughts. You're muted right now.
Thank you so much. Number one, all collaborators involved in a project must be acknowledged in their due capacity. And as such, all proceedings and recognitions must be handled accordingly. If you have to go to Nigeria to pick some species, you work with somebody, then you acknowledge them. Now we need equipment. For us to be able to work, effectively, we need equipment. We don't have the equipment. And even some equipment we have are obsolete. You can't even use them. So they're just there, useless. So we need good equipment. And then we need fundings. For example, I had to use my meager salary to fund myself to travel to US for a conference in ICU. And you know, it can be really painful when you see others being able to buy some good food and eat, and you have to look at your budget and say to yourself, all I need is fries. Of course, you don't really need the fries, but you just go for fries because that's what you have. Or some have good accommodation and you're looking for who to pair up with. You know, it's somehow demoralizing. And of course, when you sit with others, you feel maybe you're backward. So we need good funding, and we need access to publications. Beautiful publications, you have it there, you click on it, it says you should pay so. And you realize that's so amount of your salary. So you can't click on it. So you leave it, you just read the abstract. You don't know how they did the whole thing. So we need access to publications, and then we need to go on more study exchanges. You go out, learn from them, they come here, they come to where you are, teach you, and you know, it helps. And somehow you feel good. I want to sincerely appreciate Jessica for the great things she's done for me and several of my colleagues here in Nigeria. You know, you feel involved, you feel loved, you feel part of the system. And so when you stand up to say you're an entomologist, you're excited to be one of them. So we need such encouragement. Now, I just want to say something that is not everybody that is in the developing countries, is not all Blacks. Sorry to use that word. It's not all the Black people that are bad. For example, we have millions of people in Nigeria. You can imagine a crate of eggs. If you break one egg that is spoiled, you break it, the whole thing will smell. And that's exactly what is happening. We still have very good people to work with. We still have very good people that are men and women of integrity, you know, men that are accountable, that can really carry out research and really carry out the research. We have them. So let's because I realize many people are afraid of coming to Nigeria. Most of my collaborators, when you say, okay, do we invite you to come? They just say, no. Okay, we'll think about it maybe in 2 years' time, maybe in 2 years' time, they say in another 2 years. So we need people to come, and we need our people to go, to learn and come back. So it becomes like a train the trainer kind of thing. So I don't want to say so much, but just these few things will really help, you know. And then the young scientists should be encouraged, you know, to delve into the field of entomology. Like I have a young man now, Ekpa. Ekpa he's gotten a lot of grants, and this guy is jumping. I mean, in fact, I told him you are running more than your legs. You see him today, he's in this forest, tomorrow he's in that forest, because he's excited and there's enough funding for him to do it. So we need our younger ones to be funded and to also be included in the professional societies. It's so much of your salary to pay. The government is not ready to give you money for such. And the government has money, but they are not ready to go into research. I'm doing some work on butterflies, bringing back to the butterflies. That's what I said, because almost all the flowers we have in Lagos are exotic flowers. So because of that, the native flowers that are butterflies, no, they have disappeared, or some have even gone into extinction. So we wanted to bring them back. You know what they said when I went for the interview? They asked me, they said, butterflies. What's the essence of butterflies? And why must you bring them back? You know, they don't really see why you should do such a thing. So I had to explain and explain and explain. Then one of them asked me, we're going to slash your fund to maybe 25% of what you asked for. What are you going to do? You're just going to bring butterflies. So what with butterflies? You know, the mentality. So we need help. And we hope with all this, we'll be able to get more people, invitations to attend talks, conferences as we are doing now, and then recognitions and funding for researches. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kemabonta. Dr. Ware, do you have any thoughts to offer on this as someone who's just been named as someone with good practices in this area?
Well, I mean, I think like many of my colleagues in North America, we don't have all the answers in my lab, but one thing that's been really an important, I guess, foundation is that we treat each other the way that we want to be treated. And when we go to places, it's an educational exchange. The mentality of North American researchers, that sometimes I see this amongst my colleagues, where there's this idea that perhaps we have all the answers. We've read a couple of papers about Ecuador, so we'll go to Ecuador and we're the expert when we get to Ecuador. No, we really have tried to instead, engage with local communities, engage with researchers, and learn from the people who are in the countries that we're going to, who are intimately familiar, from their ancestors to now, with the local flora and fauna. And then I think that authorship is a phrase we say often when I work with the people in my lab, is that authorship is free. I mean, why be stingy with it? If you have people who are helping you with permits, who are helping you in the field, who are collecting, who are showing you where to find the insects that you're working with, why would you not write them and engage with them and invite them to write the paper with you, invite them to write into your grants funding that could support your colleagues. When it comes to the supplies that Gavin and Rhema and Dr. Kemabonta are talking about, for us, for someone who has a grant in the United States to buy a couple of extra insect nets and bring them to give to your colleagues is a drop in the bucket, but it actually can have a really strong impact. So I think there's little things that we can do that I promise you would not be a burden to my colleagues here in North America. There are things that you could do that could probably really enrich your research program by changing your mindset from being just because you have the birth lottery that allowed you to be born in Toronto doesn't mean that you're an expert in everything. And really just opening your mind to the idea, as Rhema mentioned, a Black entomologist that you interact with in Nigeria probably knows a lot more about what's happening with the flora and fauna there. And they would be a great collaborator, a true collaborator, not someone that just gets their name in the acknowledgements afterwards.
Thank you very much. I will make a couple of comments on this as well from the perspective of someone who benefits from basically a formerly colonial system currently. This is also beneficial to you as the individual in this system. More and more granting agencies, certainly in Canada, are requiring equity, diversity, and inclusion statements. And what better way than to say, I'm not just going to this place, extracting information and leaving, but in fact, I'm setting up a field lab there. To Jessica's point, it not only would benefit your science because you would interact with people locally who have local knowledge and can continue the work when you head back to go teach your classes or whatever it is in your context. But you can also show that you're genuinely engaging with diverse research teams, which the literature now shows leads to more innovation in the first place. I'll flip to the other side, the idea of conferences and also the idea of journals, especially open source journals, which can cost a lot of money. Digital is not free, but it's pretty close to free. Why are memberships in societies requiring membership fees at all from people from the global south? Why? Why are they requiring fees to publish papers in open source journals when those of us with larger grants should maybe be paying a little bit more to subsidize those efforts? So there are very concrete things that you personally can push with your learned societies. There are very concrete things that you can do personally when you think about what you are writing into your grants, and that could actually make a difference. So I think with that, I just want to ask if anyone else on the panel wanted to offer some last thoughts before we do turn to the questions, because we do have a number of questions.
I'd just like to add a few more points. So when it comes to Dr. Kemabonta's point, I absolutely do agree. You have to start people from early so they can understand how important it is and not just see it as important as it makes us $5 billion, but our own environment is important. The benefits that the butterflies would provide are important. It doesn't have to be monetary, but the ecological benefits in the current time or the present time and the future are going to be better than just $5 billion right now for the country. So you have to really scale the benefits, not just monetarily, but also ecologically and societally. Additionally, one other point I'd like to mention with regard to funding, when it comes to doing research here in Jamaica, when we're applying for transportation to go across the island, the transportation is really limited and it takes a lot of time to go to the other side of the island. It could take up to 5 hours. And by that point, the day is pretty much done. So having a research station on the other side of the island would be great. But the lack of funding limits that. So most of the research that happens in the university is centered on the eastern side of the island where the university is. And there's a lot left to be discovered and found out about the western side of the island. And that's just another way that the lack of funding and lack of access is limiting the distribution of science overall.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to offer something before we move to the questions?
Yeah, just real quick. I just want to talk about we fail to see the power of, association. One thing that happens a lot is here as Blacks or in other Black countries, we just always want to collaborate with someone out there. Our first thought is to collaborate with someone out there. We fail to see the power of association amongst ourselves. We need to, first of all, see value in ourselves before they see value in us. So we need to, first of all, understand the power of association amongst ourselves, the power of, togetherness amongst ourselves. There's someone next door that has what you're looking for, and you don't have to go all the way. You understand? So those are some of the common mistakes we make here. And it just boils down to our mentality and how we see things and how we need to, first of all, work on ourselves first before they see what we see. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. So I think maybe we'll move to the questions. And I'll just say what you're hearing here is the long, long arm of colonialism, right? The textbooks that you read, the journals we see, the movies we watch, the TV shows we watch represent Black people in a particular way, and especially Black people from the global South. And it has a huge effect that we internalize. The panelists here are clearly willing to do their work on their own ways of thinking and their own cultures, but it can't just be on that side, right? It has to be a global effort. So let's start with the first question, which we have 13 upvotes on. Wow, okay, people are very interested in this. And here's the question. What are your thoughts about repatriating specimens, especially those housed in prominent museums around the world, many of which were collected without permits, with altered permits, and through exploitation of institutions which grant permits from nature and nations in the global South? Many entomologists or arachnologists in the global South may never have had access to these specimens in their lifetimes. Does someone want to take that answer?
So I am definitely in support of repatriation of these different resources, but it's not going to be limited to that. So there are certain institutions like the museums that we get benefit from it, but we want to be able to benefit from it as well too. So if it is not repatriation of the resources, at least acknowledgement, at least let the people that are experienced in the field come, learn about the specimen and bring that knowledge back that they have gained to bring back and develop the country that they're originally from. It could even be something very, very simple where we integrate an exchange every year and have those people come back and learn more about what they've learned in the field. So in the museum, you find the specimen, you go back to your home country, find the specimen in the field, do more work on it and get to understand the whole ecology of that plant or specimen overall and better. You can even look at why it has declined over the years to help preserve science. So it is not a one-sided thing. It is not difficult to say, yes, this came from this particular place. It doesn't lose any value from saying that it increases value overall. So I am in support of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Gavin. if it can't be returned, it needs to be proper acknowledgement needs to be done, So because, there's probably a young scientist coming up and he sees that, oh, my country has this. I didn't know my country has this, So when he realizes that, oh, my country has this, my country has this, it fuels him more, and he's, there's more spark. He wants to do more. He wants to discover more. It all starts from a place of hope. Once he has the hope that, oh, my country has this is in my country, it gives him extra motivation to do more and want to discover more. So yeah, I think I agree with Gavin.
Other comments, Jessica or Kehinde?
I guess I would just
If
say,
I could,
sorry,
okay,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please, Kenny.
Yeah, if I could just, I agree with the two guys who spoke. I just want to say that those things were kept and we're still able to see them maybe after 150 or more years because they were well preserved and kept in appropriate places. We may not have those places here. For example, somewhere in one of the universities, they had no electricity for over 2 months. So all the things they had in their gene banks, of course, all gone. So just as they said, it's good to be acknowledged. So let them acknowledge the people, or keep them there. So when people want them, they can easily find them. And then let them have them digitized too. So the whole world will see them. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica?
I was actually just going to mention the same thing, Kenny, is that digitization is one way that museums can, make their specimens available to people kind of worldwide. And I know that it's something I've heard a lot of people at museums kind of talking about that. So I'll be interested to see how the conversation continues.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to point out we're about 4 minutes before the hour. The panelists did agree to stay on for another half hour. So I'm just going to work my way through all the questions that we have until we hit that point. So if you need to leave, we understand, and this is recorded and will be posted as well as live streaming. So let me go to the next question. Sometimes non-native entomologists describe new species, in quotes, that may have been recognized and known by residents in the area for a long time. How can they bring light to these organisms without erasing the local story?
I feel that situation is really delicate because when it comes to actually identifying and verifying a new species, we don't necessarily have the resources to say, yes, this is new. So it definitely will require some collaboration with external sources, and additional knowledge. But I do support whatever, like adding that local history of that particular plant or animal that has been known in this community for the past 20 years to do this particular thing. Add that historical fact to it as a part of why it's important and why it should be protected within that particular context.
Thank you. Kenny, you looked like you were about to respond as well. Does anyone else have a comment on that? Okay, I think that the idea is really similar to publications, which is make sure there's credit and make sure it's clear who contributed to that. I always like to think that I know there's all sorts of rules, but naming opportunities are a good way to acknowledge people as well. Okay, so the next question. As a Latinx scientist working in the United States, I've noticed that papers from non-Western authors tend to be less cited or studied, regardless of the quality or importance of the research itself. I'm wondering, what advices can you offer to not only included those publications in our curricula, but to properly recognize the huge contributions that have been done by BIPOC scientists from around the globe?
So I understand pretty quickly because this is something that I personally experienced. When it comes to actually looking for research, doing my own research, there was a point when I realized everything that I'm finding is in English. I'm like, that's strange. So I started actually looking for the particular terms in other languages. So I went to Spanish and French because I know those well enough. And I was able to find something that I had thought was unfound before in a French journal or French paper. And I was like, if this has been here this entire time and I had no idea and nobody else in English is referencing it, how much knowledge is left out there that we cannot access because they're in languages that we do not understand? So I personally think that if you do have particular field, all those different regions should be acknowledged. And even in my references, I try to make sure I get different people, different groups from different countries. There are even some Russian ones that I translate through Google to be able to understand what's going on. And there's so much information out there that language is, or the restriction to access to these different languages is limiting. And another point that I'd like to address when it comes to those particular aspects is different people have different names for the same things. I found when it comes to temporary waters, people in the Middle East call them wadis, people in Australia call them billabongs, and they're all the same thing. So it's getting to understand those different cultures, those different ways of communicating and integrating that into science. When it comes to the curriculum, it's something that we have to start from scratch to see that it's not just English that has information. There are other languages, so if you can integrate learning other languages in the curriculum, that'd be awesome. And also when it comes to getting people access to these, you could have different resources, different communities working together to translate and share these resources. So even if I don't speak Greek, someone who does can translate it to me and help me with that particular resource overall.
Thank you. The next one is a version of this I hear frequently. What are your thoughts or suggestions on how educators, to continue from where we just ended, can best incorporate more teaching about the impacts of colonial legacies on entomology into courses? Are there any good resources you can suggest? And do you have any advice for encouraging and helping colleagues to discuss colonialism in their own teaching? And I shout out to Jessica for having, over this week, posted some tweets on historical Black entomologists. But if anyone would like to address this.
Yeah, I think, in some of our curriculum, we see how historical studies and these kind of studies are optional. I think they should be, they should be mandatory. They can't be optional. They can't be optional. They have to be taken. These courses have to be taken because, people aren't really interested in what's in the past. People are interested in what's in the future. What am I going to gain? What am I going to see? So people don't want to look at what's behind. So we have to make these things, we have to somehow incorporate them into our curriculum, and we have to make them compulsory. They shouldn't be optional. These studies, historical studies and all that, they shouldn't be optional. They should be compulsory. And that way students are not able to, evade these kind of things, because students actively want to evade these things. They don't want to learn about these things. So yeah, they have to be made, compulsory. Yeah.
So in addition to that, I'd like to add that in addition to making this information compulsory, it's about getting to understand your own country and your own culture. So there are so many different things that indigenous peoples can contribute to science and life as a whole. It may not be specifically understood by general science, but within this community, this particular plant helps with this. You can work on developing that skill and developing that knowledge, not just as an abstract concept, but as a part of culture and science. So you're using your culture to help benefit science and help proliferate all of that, all of those benefits for not just your community that has been benefiting for decades, but also the entire world. And when it comes to going back into history, many of us in the Caribbean do not have the resources to actually trace back our ancestry. The most we'll be able to go back is about 3 or 4 generations. And that's pretty much it. There's nothing beyond that we get to actually readily study. We have a few history classes about the Tainas, but there's not much extent that has been focused on. It was only when I came to university that I found out that we had our own indigenous monkey, our own endemic monkey that was in Jamaica. And I found that so cool. Like, there's so many different things that we didn't know about from the early ages or early stages that we're learning about now. And if I didn't know about them earlier, I'd have loved Jamaica even more. Like, we had a monkey, that's so cool. We had flightless ibises, that is so cool. Like, it's about getting to respect your own culture, not just what is here, but what was here, and to see how the things that are here now could not be here in the future and why we need to protect them. I remember one particular point about the Jamaican iguana, the endemic Jamaican iguana. they're trying to clear the area or a specific area that humans haven't disturbed too much. And there was a politician that was not very supportive of that. He was saying that we're going to not develop this island because of too little lizard, and not realizing that that lizard is the largest reptile in Jamaica that is currently alive, and not seeing the benefit that it does have, not just for tourism, but for Jamaican society as a whole. Like there was one point where this area that I'm in right now is called Ligani, and there used to be so many of those iguanas. The area is named after them because of the iguanas. And now there are barely any. There are none in the area, but there are barely any on the island overall. So it's about getting to appreciate what we have. It may not be big, it may not be flashy, but it's ours. It grew up here. It developed and adapted to the different climates and environments here, from above ground to underground, across the oceans and everything. Those are ours. They are our culture.
Actually, that leads really well into the next question, which was also touched on by Dr. Kemabonta earlier. I study a group that is speciose, but doesn't have a major impact on economics, health, or agriculture. And sometimes I struggle to encourage people to think of this group as still important for biodiversity and intrinsic value. How do you encourage the general public, and by extension, sometimes governments, right, to take interest in arthropods like this?
Yeah, if I should come in here, most times you don't even know what you have. Just as Gavin said, you don't know. So maybe we will need to have maybe citizen science programs where these people are called, and then you make it more interesting, very interesting, not just, you know, something you just talk and people are tired or they have slept or they switch off even before you speak for 5-10 minutes. So it has to be interesting. And we just need to see how we can, you find most people prefer what is there. Your neighbor's green grass is always greener than yours. Until you get there, then you find yours is even more green. So sometimes it's good we bring them and do a training, you know, continuous training, continuous re-education in the media, and make it interesting, not like, you know, sit down and learn this. You know, maybe you go on excursion and you do something, then the students, I mean, people will appreciate those things more, and then we can start from the younger ones so they grow up to appreciate all these things. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to the next question, but I'll also point out that there could be a role here for those of us, again, in the global north, because if we engage social media and communications, a lot of us have universities that are eager to have stories to tell. And so those stories told well with great pictures and narrative can help to convince people that these creatures are interesting and important. So let me move on to the next question. What are your thoughts on the concept, practice, and use of parataxonomists and para-ecologists in tropical insect diversity research? And I'll maybe ask first if someone wants to define that, and if not, I can ask Socrates, who asked the question, to define those terms.
I'm not familiar with the term para-ecologist, so I'd like that definition, please.
So Socrates, I'm going to try to elevate you to being able to speak. And if you wish not to, then that's fine. I'm going to say allow to talk. And if you could define.
I could also give a definition if Socrates isn't able to join in.
Okay, maybe that's better. Jessica, if you could. Thank you.
Well, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Socrates, this is when, you know, you kind of have, perhaps you set up a bunch of malaise traps in Madagascar, what have you, and then you have kind of members of the general public who may or may not be trained, kind of sort the specimens that you have that allow, you know, into piles. And then, you know, either a parachute entomologist or other can come in and then look through the piles and kind of figure out what species you have and do the species description. And I think this is a relatively common practice that kind of is sometimes paid labor, but sometimes not paid labor. I'm not sure if this is what Socrates was referring to.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Well, basically, the concept on parataxonomy and bioecology stems from Dan Jansen's tropical research in Costa Rica and Novotny's research in Papua New Guinea. Basically, these are local people that are basically trained that goes hand in hand with like official scientists or taxonomists or ecologists working in that area.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So if someone wants to answer, it sounds like what you're all calling for. So if you have any comments on it, that would be great.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like it is citizen science getting people more involved in that. And when it comes to Jamaicans doing research, we do some aspect of that. We don't necessarily get as involved, but we get, if there are always people that are interested, they're always like, why out over this one? Or they try to offer some kind of advice. Like one of the things when we're going into some mangrove areas, they say that there are crocodiles there, and then they come over and we start talking about what exactly that is. So, and there is the ability to establish connections to be able to help in that area. And sometimes those people are the ones that we call in contact to say, is it a good time to come, or what is the best season to come, and help us with our own research. So that I do absolutely 100% support that, because it not just facilitates for research for betterment of the environment or betterment of our articles, but also it helps people know about their area. If they do not, they see this particular bird, they don't know why it's important, but they see somebody interested in it, they could then themselves find themselves being more interested in it and also other organisms that are surrounding it. So I 100% support that.
Excellent. A great idea for capacity building. Rhema.
Yeah, I totally agree. I support that 100%. You know, it's from my understanding of this, it's just, you know, pretty much division of labor, you know, and it helps with, you know, decentralization of knowledge. You know, if there's one thing I noticed in the field of academia is there's people that hoard knowledge, you know, instead of, you know, letting everyone have a piece of that, you know. So it helps with decentralization of information, of knowledge. You know, everybody is involved, you know, carry everyone along. So yeah, that's pretty much just division of labor, which we're talking about, you know, inclusion. You know, everybody just has a piece of it and everybody is recognized accordingly. So yeah, I'm totally in support of that.
Thanks very much. We'll move on to the next question. I'm curious if any of the panelists have had experience or interactions with the UN Nagoya Protocol when it comes to collections or companies and universities coming in for discovery. Is it helpful or limiting, or just a lot of paperwork for you? Or have you avoided collaborations because of it, et cetera? The US didn't sign on to the protocol, so US-based researchers don't have to think about it. Comments on that? I don't know if anyone's interacted with that protocol.
I could give a definition if that's helpful. So the Nagoya Protocol aims to try and limit, you know, people collecting specimens from other countries without proper permits. And so you need to acknowledge there is paperwork that goes with it. Any publications that include specimens have to have proper permits, and kind of you can trace the trail right back to where the specimen was collected. Just as a very abbreviated definition.
I don't know if people have had interactions with it.
So I haven't had interactions personally with that particular protocol, but I do know of some stories where some of those protocols were not adhered to, and specimens that are Jamaican specimens were absconded with and taken away from the country. And when asked to return them, that is not a possibility because there's no actual tracking paperwork to say, hey, they were officially taken from the country. But I do know that when it comes to the National Environmental Agency here in Jamaica, they do, whenever you're doing any research on any organism, they have an extensive list that requires you to list what species you're going to be working with. If you're going to be taking back any, how will they be preserved, how many will be taking, so you can have a good account of what's going on. And one additional thing that I do see them doing as well too is whenever there are researchers in the country, one thing that they can provide is actually an education system or education opportunity within the community, either at the university here or in the community itself where the research is going on. So it is benefiting the community, benefiting the country overall. And I think it would be great to have expanded and have more integrated, not just for the purpose of research, but for general sharing knowledge among other people who would benefit.
You. Dr. Kemabonta, do you have any comments from the perspective of Nigeria?
I think most times the scientists they don't believe in coming to pick these things and go without permits. So the real scientists go, they get the permit, and they pick the animals or the plants and they go with it. So most times, or at least so many of the scientists I know who come over, they ask for permit. Even before you go, they will ask you, where is the permit that allows us to do this? And then we show them the permit. Who would have worked on the permit before they come? It's only those who pouch on like pangolins and so on, you know, they just come, they meet the people by the waterside or in the market, they buy these things and go. Apart from that, most times they seek permits and they are always given the permission to carry those things with them.
Thank you. That's good to hear that people are adhering. I mean, I think journals and granting societies have a role to play here too in requiring that you demonstrate these things. And I think that has become more of a common practice, certainly than when I started, when you could just sort of grab things, put them in your backpack, I think, and fly home. Okay, so our next question. As both Dr. Kemabonta and Gavin have mentioned, funding is lacking in the Global South, and it is a direct legacy of colonialism. What are your thoughts about repatriation science, pushing major institutions, museums, and universities that have created legacies of science, built the careers of countless white entomologists and arachnologists, and capitalized on, archaeologists, capitalize on expeditions and collections from the Global South, and have those institutions support exchange programs for the Global South entomologists to access resources that may be lacking in their countries, as well as supporting capacity building through capital investment in the Global South, rather than continuing parachute science and expeditions that further perpetuate these colonial legacies. I have to say, thank you so much for writing this. I believe this is one of your students, Jessica, who wrote this commentary. Please take a screenshot of this with your camera and take it home. Yes, absolutely 100%. And I'll let our panelists comment on it.
I think somehow it depends on the institution. Like University of Lagos, we have a lot of collaborators coming in and sharing whatever they have with us, and we're also allowed, there's a funding for some of us to go out and, you know, learn from them and then come back to train the trainers. So it depends on the institution. University of Lagos is doing a lot on that, and there will be some agreements written, and you know, it's coming in. At least in the past 3 years, we have a lot of it coming in. So it depends on the institution or the establishment. Some are not interested. So, but most that are interested, they come in and there's collaboration, so you can go and come. But the other aspect of the funding I'm talking about is like for the Organization of Women in Science for the Developing World. They just stopped some countries and said, your country has money, we cannot fund you. Meanwhile, the country is not funding anything on research. So more or less, the people are there just wasting away in quotes, and they can just carry out few researches here and there while they have the dream of doing bigger researches. So I just feel maybe some organizations should not just say, because this, the world, whatever says, this one, they have enough money, so no funding. But they should see to fund, you know, researches so that people will move forward and be at par with their colleagues.
Thanks for that. Gavin?
It's really hard to, I do support repatriation of resources, but that is not innately its solution, because when it comes to repatriation of resources, there's still a high amount of corruption within different organizations in Jamaica that would abscond with those funds and not necessarily directly go towards those services. So we need to first try to get rid of corruption as much as possible, and also make sure that innately those things within science are respected and cared about. So it's not about always looking to other colonial powers to actually give us resources, but actually how can we make our own resources? Yes, we have lost a lot when it comes to actually being able to build our country, because our resources, we started way, way back in comparison to all the other countries. So it is important to have those resources, have those funds, have that information available. But there are still some systemic issues that are still present in these societies because of colonialism that need to be addressed. So dropping like $5 trillion in Jamaica won't give all that funding towards science, because people will act as if they haven't seen money before and then try to hoard it as much as possible. And then those resources don't get evenly distributed. So those issues, those systemic issues brought on by colonialism need to be addressed. And it really is going to take a long time and a lot of effort and a lot of talking about it. Like, this is not something that is easily fixed, something that can be done within a few years or few days. There's so many different aspects of society right now, especially in Jamaica, that are so focused on being important or being seen as important. You have to have the biggest house because that makes you important. You have to have like the coolest job, or you have to like do these particular things to be seen as important, when we're already important. Naturally, within ourselves, just being human, being alive, we're important. We don't need to prove that to anybody. We don't need to buy anything to show that. We need to have that respect for our own selves and our own people, and have a ground on which to stand on for ourselves before we can move on overall.
Thank you. We just have two more questions, and this one is, the Entomological Society of America has an international branch. Do the panelists see a role for this organization to play a larger role in supporting international collaborations and addressing the important issues that were discussed today?
Did you go for the question? I think I didn't have the baseline of it.
Oh, sorry, that the Entomological Society of America has an international branch. So it's basically asking whether societies like this, whether their international branches should be actively engaged in trying to address some of the international collaboration challenges that you've identified.
Yeah, I do think that there is a responsibility, not just because insects aren't restricted to one particular location, they can be transported throughout the entire world. Like we were talking recently about Pantala flavescens, that is a global species or a one big population that transcends so many boundaries. So understanding entomology on a whole is not just beneficial to a particular country, but to the world overall. So there should be more inclusion. There should be more respect when it comes to including other countries, other peoples, other regions overall, because we are all connected as a human being. And as Pantala flavescens had shown, it's one big world. So yeah.
Pantala is a good spokesperson for global entomology. I would just give a plug for the dragonflies.
Okay, yeah, and I would call on you to start asking your societies to do more. Absolutely, 100%. This has to be on their agenda, and it has to be part of all the different, I mean, an international branch is great, but you also should have this built into the workings of the society all the way through, this recognition. And then our last question. Sorry, Rhema, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to say, yes, the societies like the ESA have, international branch of ESA have, a huge role to play. It all boils down to the littlest details, like, the mentor and mentee match, pairing a white mentor, a black mentee, a black mentor, a white mentee, just so they can share their values, they can share their cultures, it all helps, when a black mentee shares his culture, his values, his tradition, and things like that with his white mentor, he goes back to his colleagues and then he discusses these things with his colleagues, and there's just a general flow of information. It just boils down to the little things like that. It's Maydianne said something earlier, I don't know if it was today or before the webinar started. She said we all have our roles to play in our little ways. We all have power, and so that we all have our roles to play. We all have power. We all have the power to influence this thing in our little capacities. Some of us find ourselves in different ways, different places where we can impact and make a change. So with that being said, the international branch has its role to play. It actually being a body, being a society, it actually has a larger reach than we do individually. It has a larger reach, and as such, it has a larger role to play. and can, you know, affect this issue, this situation in a greater measure.
Thank you. And then our last question. Institutions in countries that are former colonizers have offered affirmative action scholarships for Black students and individuals from formerly colonized countries. What are your thoughts on this practice as a means of trying to boost the scientific capacity of the former colonized countries? And I'll just point out, I assume that some of the question underlying this includes the fact that you're then drawing people out of their country to go to school overseas, and do they come back?
Well, okay. You know, I think it boils down to, you know, they say wherever you go, never forget home. So when it's a good thing. It's not particularly a bad thing that they, you know, try to take students, and, you know, some people might consider that as poaching. I don't consider that as poaching. I consider, you know, they are trying to educate the students, and it is left to the student to, you know, bring what has been, you know, inculcated in him, what he has been, you know, taught, and try and, you know, apply it back home, and try and, you know, establish some correspondence, establish some collaboration between himself, between what, you know, to pass on what he has learned to the people at home. If he can't go there personally, he can have collaborations, he can have, you know, meetings, and, you know, just somehow pass on what has been taught, what has been learned onto people back home. So it's not particularly you're only taking out the person. You're not taking out, you know, his entire connection with his home. You're just taking out the person. And good thing we live in a world where, you know, you don't. But the coronavirus has shown us that you don't particularly have to be anywhere to affect that place. So, you know, yeah. So you can be anywhere in the world and affect home, you know, positively. So that's not particularly a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, actually, because, you know, if the person is back at home, it's just here, not learning much, you know. So, but when he goes out there, there's exposure, and then he's able to, you know, pass on that knowledge back home, and, you know, for it to be applied. So yeah, I think that's generally a good thing.
Thank you for that. Dr. Kemabonta.
Yeah, it's a very good thing. You see, for my PhD students, I didn't have that privilege, but I realized I see it as a privilege. If you are undergoing a PhD program, and then you spend part of your research overseas and come back, they are never the same with their peers, because you have the state-of-the-art equipment with the best instructors and best environments, and you learn. You come back, you are far, far better than your peers. Though when some of them come back, they become so proud and pompous. I'm just coming from America and I know this, you don't know this, especially forgetting that maybe their supervisors help them to go. But, you know, to me, it's the best. I have seen it, several young ones, when they are here, they don't even ask questions, they don't talk, they just keep moping and looking during presentations. But once they come back, you will know this young lady or this young man has just come back. And then all the things they were with that they never saw, going there and coming back, they now see those things which we living there do not see. So it's a privilege, and I encourage it. In fact, like my children, I make sure they do their masters abroad. And if they want, they stay there. If not, they come back. But when they come back, they're never the same with the others, you know. So it's a welcome thing, and I look forward to it. In fact, I want all my students to have that opportunity. Though I didn't have it, but I know it will be good for them. And I've seen it. It's very good. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We just have 2 minutes left, actually. Gavin, if you have something very quickly to add.
I'm just going to add really quickly. So Jamaicans and Caribbean people love the Caribbean so much because everything's awesome here. The corruption is terrible, sure, but we have beaches all around. We do not have snow. Yes, the summers can be hot, but it's not as bad as some other places. So many people, whenever they do go back, whenever they do go out, they want to come back because things are awesome here. And that is something that is always a thing in Caribbean people. If not to physically come back, they send back resources to develop the resources that help them to get to where they are. So I'm totally in support of that. Like, it's so awesome to see that knowledge and those resources actually get back to Jamaica and help to build it. The only issue though is we still need that more respect for science and respect for research when it comes to actually getting that back into the system.
Thank you so much. I want to end by just thanking you all so much for your contributions, thanking all of you in the audience, the attendees, for being here and for thinking about these issues. I hope, like me, this has really reversed any little hint of a deficit narrative that was in your head around scientists from other places. They have so much to offer. We just need to be able to see that and to make sure we're building it into our systems of science. Thank you for taking the time to think about this today. And again, thank you so much to our panelists for being here. And I hope you all have a good evening, morning, afternoon, or whatever it is, wherever you're tuning in from. Take care.